Monsieur Juneau, Ken Johnson.
How do you do, Ken?
Continue. Slavko Klimke.
How do you do?
Randy Roberts.
How do you do?
Bonjour.
Sorry, I
Sit
kept
over
you
here.
waiting, I think. And change the hour and so on.
Leo.
Slavko,
Ken.
Randy. And Randy.
3 Winnipeggers and an ex-Winnipegger.
I noticed that, yeah.
Monsieur le Président, je tiens à vous remercier pour cette occasion. Malheureusement, comme vous ne pourrez pas l'être, je crois que beaucoup de nos membres aiment de vous rencontrer, vous serrer la main et de vous voir personnellement. Mais je crois quand même que ça fait un genre de trait d'union entre ne pas y être du tout et puis quand même d'être représenté. Alors de ça, on vous remercie. Le but vraiment de notre rencontre, j'espère, c'est d'avoir un échange assez avec beaucoup d'aise et j'espère que ça sera peut-être l'idée que nous sommes tous des gens qui ont à cœur le système de communication qui est très important pour tous les Canadiens. Alors, c'est dans cette optique-là que j'aimerais qu'on puisse vous parler cet après-midi. Mr. President, as regional producers, we are dismayed, as I'm sure you are, to what is happening to public broadcasting in this country. We are equally angered by the effects of the downsizing on regional broadcasting. We feel very much betrayed by a centralist organization. As you know, we believe in a CBC with community roots, a Canadian system of broadcasting which reflects the political, the social, the geographical, and the cultural diversities of this country. We have defended these principles over the years, as you know, with written presentations and testimonies and briefs and submissions to various government agencies, as well as speaking to the public at large. We are saddened to tell you this afternoon that the goals and objectives of a regional CBC working in harmony with the network system no longer seems feasible, achievable in this organization. Our membership, Mr. President, has lost confidence in the senior leadership of this corporation because we see no evidence that regional broadcasting is valued by senior management. We do see evidence of erosion of regional production capacity. We have experienced a restructuring of the organization, which has weakened regional ability to achieve the mandate. We feel abandoned in a non-consultative style of management, which excluded our input at the time of very severe crisis to the CBC. It is in this climate, and we could not remain silent, that we submitted a proposal to the Kaplan-Sauvageau committee asking for a separate regional-based public broadcasting system. But because we so strongly believe in the open lines of communication and believe this to be an important factor to its success, to the CBC's success, we come to you this afternoon to discuss openly and frankly these preoccupations that that we are hearing clearly from our membership, and to champion once more the principles of regional broadcasting. My first question, Mr. President.
Well, before you go to a first question,
Yes.
I think I should say a few words. You suggested that this would be an informal and relaxed discussion and a frank discussion, and you can believe it will be relaxed and it will certainly be frank. And I would like to comment right away on your preliminary remarks. You wanted to be frank, it'll be frank all right, and it'll be blunt. I appreciate the fact that you have spoken very frankly and that you have expressed no doubt an irritation that is not only yours but that of your colleagues. Let me react as frankly. I completely disagree with what you have said. I can understand the reasons, though, for such emotions and such feelings and such views, but I completely disagree. I think that what you have said is typical of the worst danger that is now threatening the CBC. You referred to Kaplan-Sauvageau. You know what Jerry Kaplan told me during one of the many discussions we had? He said, I'm amazed at how much backbiting there is in your organization. How every group is criticizing other groups. He said, I have had more criticism of the CBC from within than I have had perhaps from outside. And I think that this has been, when in times of prosperity, and the CBC has known times of prosperity, like the rest of the country, in times of prosperity, that is perhaps not too serious. The problem that I fear, not only that I fear, but that I notice, that I see very clearly over the last few years when we have had no prosperity, is that people in the CBC have been fighting among themselves. The West has been saying that the East has had a better deal. The East, and believe me, I'm speaking of Sydney, I'm speaking of Matan, I'm speaking of Rimouski, I'm speaking of Newfoundland, have been saying that that the rest of the country has been better treated. Everybody has been saying, instead of rallying and saying we've got a problem, and if we don't stick together and look at that common problem we have, a number of groups have been saying, we here have got a problem, and gee whiz, we are badly treated, and those other guys are well treated. And so that the attention of our own people themselves, but the attention of the people outside the CBC, instead of being focused on the overall problem of the CBC, has been distracted, drawn towards a series of quarrels, of local quarrels.
Right, agreed. But
Now, and therefore, what do you see in the media? You don't see a lot of people, either CBC people or CBC listeners or CBC audiences or the rest of the media hearing about the overall problem of the CBC. You hear that this group says that they have been mistreated, that other group in another part of the country has been mistreated, the technicians say that they're mistreated, and that presumably the producers are well treated, the producers say the reverse,
Right.
and that I think is very serious. Everybody has been fighting for a slightly larger slice of the pie at the expense of some other people's part of the pie.
Sure,
And
agreed.
therefore the overall, but there's been almost no concern about the overall problem, and if you want to use the term pie, about the overall size of the pie.
Mr. Juneau, the other side of that is, though, that the reason we get so much criticism within the corporation is that we love the corporation, and we believe strongly in public broadcasting, and we fear for what part of it is going down the drain. We fear a loss.
So do I. So do I. And we'll get back to that. But I'm just referring to the part of Leo's remarks which says that, well, I'm not going to repeat. I'm just referring to the temptation. It's not a temptation. It is the tendency for each group to focus and to draw all the attention to the fact that they are mistreated,
Yes.
as if there was no overall problem.
Yes.
The problem is overall.
Right, but I think one of the things that we shouldn't, I agree with what you're saying, and that's one of the things why, when the first round of cuts happened, even though we were quarreling amongst ourselves internally about methodology, communication, and all of that, we went to the public.
Yes,
we were
with a
part
very, very good series of documents,
we were
I must say.
Besides those documents of which we shared with our Toronto colleagues, we were very involved in the Halifax rally, the Vancouver rally, the Winnipeg one, and the one in Edmonton. And those arts groups, when they gathered together, a lot of the catalyst and the information and the organization came from this organization.
I
and
know
so
that.
what we were attempting to do there was to deal with a corporation that was being attacked from all sides. And we felt that this was the time to rally around the corporation. I think now, 2 years later, we see, again, not to repeat what I just said, that is the basis for these opening remarks. Mm-hmm. And as I say, I don't want to be using papers, but that was the reason, to just make sure it's clear as possible, is that this certainly doesn't come out of the way it was in the old days and that's correct, where we're back by.
I was just going to say the history of the CTPA, Mr. President, has been one that has attempted to move the organization forward in that kind of holistic way you're talking about. We wrote New Beginnings, which you're familiar with. We have, as you suggested, personally in this room, we've written many documents attempting to deal with the issues of public broadcasting in a macro sense. And so I would suggest you read this as an organization that has done that historically and is at a crossroads. And we are at a crossroads because, frankly, all those things that we believe in that you share with us, we become collectively skeptical about realizing them. And I think that's important for you to understand. That's why, at this point, I think it's important for us to have this kind of honest, relaxed exchange.
Yes. So, about the reasons for being worried, and you use the word skeptical, I think there is. I'm not going to use the word skeptical, but I'm very much tempted to use it. I think that it is not a period for, it is a period for considerable concern. So on that, we agree.
Okay. If I may, I'd like to just begin with the first question. What we never really completely understood, and now we're using historic, present, and also very concerned about the future, is the regional structure. That was the appointment of a vice president in charge of the regional, and then, of course, he then appointing a vice president in charge of French, Marie Poulain. We never really had an idea that how that structure would work, and we were very concerned at the time that it was put into place, that it had any chances of succeeding. I was wondering if you could speak to us about that.
Well, I think that there is no reason for structures to be rigid. When I became president and Bill Armstrong became executive vice president, there were several new people here at the senior management level. I did a fair amount of traveling across the country, and everywhere where I went in the regions, people were complaining that they felt they didn't have enough attention from headquarters, and they didn't have enough attention from Toronto on the English side or Montreal on the French side. And so we felt that with the agreement of the board that something ought to be done. And we set up the separate leadership for regional activities in both radio and television. With hindsight, you can always think that you might have done things differently, but there is no such thing as hindsight in reality. So I'm not displeased with what we did at the time. I think that that it gave more importance to the region. We heard much more. There was a team of people here in the building that constantly talked about the regions. I met Doug Ward and Marie Poulain in the elevator, in the hall. We had meetings very frequently. When they weren't official meetings, they were informal, as I said, in the halls. So that it really gave a presence. And I think also that I don't think, from what I've seen and what I've heard before, that any time before that a senior vice president, that senior people at headquarters spent as much time in the regions as Marie Poulain and Doug Ward did. So I think it was good. Now, at the same time, we heard, even from people in the regions, a lot of concern about the structure. You probably heard them, so I'm not going to summarize them, but just to give an example, there were concerns that maybe the regional people were too much cut off from the network people, where after all a lot of programs originate in terms of careers. Maybe it separated the regional people from the network people. There was a fair amount of criticism of the structure. So we're trying something else. I've heard the view, because I met recently, I happened to be in Lake Louise at the same time as the radio producers were meeting, so I spent a fair amount of time with them answering questions like we're doing today. And there they expressed concern about what's going to happen now. I think that we should try this new formula. It keeps some of the advantages of the old, because there will still be senior people here next to Bill Armstrong and myself with nothing to think about but the regions. They will be the advocates of the regions. They will have the authority on the budget of the regions. Not the sole authority, but they will have the authority on the budgets of the regions, radio and television. They will have the authority on the people in the regions. They'll have the authority on the... However, it is true that the responsibility for programs is going to be with the network. So it'll be, countervailing powers, so to speak. And as I said to the radio producers, I think we must all work to try and make... there is no, in complex organizations like the CBC, there are no perfect formulas in terms of structures. Structures are always a bit artificial, because in the end it's people who count. You've got to have structures, but they're never perfect. The previous one was not perfect. I'm not going to try and persuade you that any other structure, including the one we now are setting up, will be perfect. I think we've got to try and make it work. Anyway, you'll have other questions on the subject, I'm sure.
I was going to ask about the division very specifically between, let's call it the administrative side of regional broadcasting and the programming side. Do you not see that possibly causing as much confusion and problems for us as the old system? There
are always problems in organizational structures. For instance, you have people who have authority on human resources and finance, and their authority is on people who are in programming. They've got a certain authority. Finance has a certain authority on people who are in programming, and yet programs come under other people, vice presidents for the media. So if people can't find ways to mesh and balance and combine the authority they have, then it doesn't work. There are no perfect structures. So yes, there's a possibility for tensions between the vice president regions, who will have a certain line of authority, and the vice president's media. It means, like in all organizations, constant attention by these people, but constant attention also on the part of people like Bill Armstrong to arbitrate, smooth the, we've got quite often problems between the communications people in the organization who are responsible for promotion and the people who make programs, who are concerned about the way their programs are being promoted. So that's well known, and we all have to try and make these systems work.
If I can move beyond the system for a moment about regionalism and talk specifically about Let's Do It. There's, as you well know, a chapter in the book on regionalism. Some of us have found it somewhat difficult to understand. There is the general, I think, reaffirmation of the mandate about our needs to reflect the regions and do that sort of programming. But some of us have seen a kind of underlying tendency in it which suggests the most important things we do in the regions is information program, because it is in some ways the lifeblood of our network information, the service. It provides folks, it has a strong presence. I wonder, in your mind, given that document, what you see as being the kind of regional input and the regional kind of stations we want in this place. And could you give me some precision to how you feel that particular chapter in the book will inform this the kind of regional television stations we might have in 2, 3, 5 years?
Well, that your question doesn't take into account, and quite rightly, the financial situation. Of course, a lot will depend on that. But
neither did Let's Do It.
Neither did Let's Do It. You're quite right, and that was a conscious decision. I don't see the regions in what we hope would be an ideal situation. I don't see the regions limited to information programming. I would hope that the regions, particularly the the stronger regions in terms of numbers of people able to produce for the networks in the field of entertainment, drama, variety, performance. Certainly. I think that we're no different from any other country. We may need more than any other country to give a chance to the regions of this country to take part in network programming in the field of drama and entertainment because of the nature of the country that we all know about. But in effect, of course, I think that we are not different from any other country in the sense that it is not easy for small areas to produce programs in the entertainment field for networks. But I think we've succeeded in the past, and there is no reason why we shouldn't succeed in the future. Also, if they are going to do that, I would think that it would be necessary for regions to have the possibility of producing entertainment programs and performance programs for their own area, so that younger producers can develop the competence to eventually produce more elaborate programs for network use. At the moment, of course, I acknowledge that that sort of policy is not applicable to any large extent.
I guess my follow question that would be this: given that dollars don't seem to be increasing, and you've said that many times, given the fiscal restraint the whole country is under, and that seems to me will continue, when we make choices finally, which I think are going to have to be made in terms of the directions we're going, what will be first to go? Where does the region stack up in that list?
Well, I won't be absolutely blunt on this. I said I would be blunt, but I won't be absolutely blunt on this because we want to have a discussion on that with the board of directors next week, although we've had many discussions on this subject. But we are fearful about 1987-88, our financial situation for 87-88, and therefore I want to discuss with the board in very precise terms the sort of question you've asked. I have said, though, a number of times publicly, and I have said to the government that I will not recommend myself to the board, and I hope the board will not recommend to the government that the regions be the first thing to go. Now, many people disagree with me on this. I think that there are fewer people now who disagree with me on this inside the corporation, although I think a few years ago there were strong disagreements in certain areas of the corporation on this subject. There are still people outside the corporation, for instance, a very important Toronto newspaper that shall remain nameless, after the last series of cuts, published an editorial saying that CBC had it all wrong, that the first thing we should have done would have been to cut the regions in order to strengthen the networks. So it was a very, very aggressive editorial which said that we were crazy. But I don't agree. I personally don't agree with that.
We put forward the notion that in several cases that the network should be the sum of its parts. How do you respond to that personally?
No, if you mean that it should be nothing but an aggregate of all the parts, I don't agree with that. Not more than I agree that a country is the aggregate, like a pile of stones. Mm-hmm. I think it's more than that. No, I don't agree that the network should be just a compilation or an addition.
I'm thinking more that the strength of the entire Canadian Broadcasting Corporation might best be vested right across the country. The editorial you refer to speaks to the notion of eliminating almost everything that the CBC does except for the long haul network.
Yeah, and I disagree with that. I think that to go on with your explanation of what it is, that theory is, that we probably both disagree with, it's the idea that if the CBC is too many things to too many people, that the times have become more difficult, that we should drop some of the things we are doing and concentrate on what these people say is the essential thing, namely network programming to compete with the United States. So let's drop what we're doing in the regions. We can't afford it anymore, they say, and let's put all our money in national series or national programs in English and in French, particularly in drama where we are so weak.
Mr. Juneau,
So I don't agree with. I don't agree with. I even I think there is a case to be made that at the moment when we are facing such extremely difficult financial circumstances that perhaps it is better, although that is a terrible decision to make, perhaps it is better to say, okay, for a while, as long as the difficult situation endures, we'll reduce network programming. We'll have more American programs on. They're cheaper. They produce revenue. It's a shame. It would be a shame to have to do that. A horrible shame, particularly for me. I've been fighting for Canadian content for a long time. But at least you don't disorganize the whole structure of the CBC. You maintain what to me is essential, namely that it is not an aggregation of parts, but a body, you know, with members and a soul, and the soul is in every part of the body and not only in the head. And so you don't destroy that. So I think there's a strong case to be made for that. I don't know what the board will say, but I think there's a strong case to be made. Now, there are people who will say that it's absolutely wrong, that the most sacred thing is to continue strengthening or at least not weakening our network programming so that, you know, we maintain Canadian content, we fight the Americans, we win the ratings, the audience battles. I don't like the word ratings, but we maintain the affection of our audiences for our network programming, and therefore that we're absolutely wrong. That's what that editorial said. But I think there's a strong argument to be made the other way. Now, I'm not sure what Campbell and Sauvageau will say, and their report is supposed to be transmitted to the minister within days. I don't know when it'll be made public. I don't know what the government would say, but I could make a very strong argument in that direction.
The aspect, of course, that you've heard us say many, many times, the type of programming that's close to home, that's distinctive, the types of things that the National Film Board used to do, where they used to have, you know, regional production centers. They used to do a lot of reflective programming, reflecting communities to themselves. The types of things that we did an awful lot more of and do an awful lot less of presently. If we go to your analogy with the body, I mean, it's all wonderful to have this, to keep this body intact, but if it begins to be something that people don't recognize anymore, that find no utility in it, do not see a sense of identification with that body, it becomes a non-person. And I you know, without doing the whole thing with the film board, I was dismayed when in our own area, when they absolutely shut down the production area of the film board. No one said anything.
What do you mean they shut down the production area of the film
Ben,
board?
sur le côté français de l'Office national du film à Winnipeg, c'est maintenant ça représente les prairies. Et, tu sais, avant, c'était un aspect très, très créatif, productif, etc. Maintenant, c'est devenu un truc, c'est là. But people never looked to that because it was a very slow process of you know, cutting toes off and cutting an arm off, and then finally what you've got is something that's just there in a wheelchair that really it's too bad it's gone, but that's all it is.
But that, I mean, we've got to talk about these things. I mean, this is not good. It's awful. I'm only saying that we're discussing right now the choice some choice, some balance between network and regions. It's a choice, but if we had to make a choice where we would, in future reductions, and I hope temporary, we would reduce more, let us say, at the network level than at the regional level. I would argue with the network people, the way I just argued at the beginning of this conversation with you, don't pick up a fight with the regions. You know, let's say this is our strategy at the moment because we've got to do something. We've got to go through this difficult period somehow and hope to survive without losing any important limbs. But don't pick a fight with the regions. Let's, you know, say we've got an overall problem, to use the words I was using before, and let's not have a big controversy within the CBC about that. Let's have a controversy about the role of the CBC generally.
You know,
So,
I wouldn't like
you know,
to see us pick a fight with the network, but I would like to see the Producers Association consulted when this kind of budget cut problem is faced. Are you going to consult us when you get these future cuts?
well, that's, you know, the word consultation is used a lot these days, and certainly the management has been criticized about not enough consultation. It is, in practice, it's much more difficult than it sounds. I would hope that there would be more consultation. But take 1987, you know, what happens generally, for 85-86, let me take an example. For 85-86, we hear that we may lose another $10 million. There are very strong noises that we may lose another 10 million this year. So are we going to go out and consult? We don't know whether we're going to lose the $10 million or not. There seems to be strong possibility we will. So, okay, we're not taking a lot of time to travel across the country working on that. At the moment, we're trying to work rather on not getting that cut. You know, if I'm going to, the time I would spend traveling across the country to consult, I wouldn't be doing some other work here. And, you know, I work pretty long hours anyway, just doing that.
What about asking for some ideas on how to save that $10 million if...
We did write to some unions who had asked for consultation, and we said, you know, you've got regional directors. Yes, by all means, you've got regional directors. If you're in Toronto, you've got vice presidents, or even if you're in the regions, there's a vice president regions. If you have views as to, we've been having cuts now for a number of years, by all means, write to Doug Ward or write to Denny Harvey or write to Margaret, and they'll sit down and entertain the suggestions you may have as to, but you know, we've got 29 unions. If I, you know, travel all around the country to consult, every time there is another budget reduction, I'll do nothing but that. But, you know, there are many vice presidents and there are many regional directors, by all means. And if for some reason or other there isn't enough an open door, you can write to me and I, you know, I'll insist with the vice presidents that they listen to the suggestions you may have to make as to where the cuts. However, it's like in many things, consultation doesn't mean that we will necessarily agree. Now there are other types of consultations. You know, it is a very complex thing. The people, not only the CBC staff or the CBC staff unions, but the city councils. You know, if we reduce we wanted to close the stations in Gander a year and a half ago, and the whole city council of Gander and the Minister of Communications for Newfoundland wanted to be consulted, and was, in that case, was consulted. So we can't spend all our time, decisions have to be made. So yes, consultations, but we won't always agree.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I think one point is that, and you've said this many times and other presidents have, that the producers are the lifeblood of the CBC. We finally do the programming. Given that we do the programming and given the cuts affect us very directly in terms of how we do public broadcasting, finally what we're here for, it seems to me there is a kind of relationship we ought to have about these kind of decisions. It makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense, and I don't know why such discussions don't take place. We've met, I don't know whether you're still the president of the, we've met a couple of times, not particularly to discuss cuts, I think, but to discuss your views as a union. Yes, by all means, I don't see any...
I think what we're pointing to is the type of situation that we all experience, because our area of expertise, of course, is working in stations and not running a large network like what you're charged with. But nonetheless, when you're working with a small station, it's a living organism as well, to get back into analogies. And to get a feeling within that organization that it's under stress, that it's being challenged, in fact, it's life-threatening, is that organism should be sort of working amongst themselves for survival. What we found, and this is a straight echo from Vancouver right to St. John's, was that management was saying, our hands are tied, we can't consult. We've been told this is secret. You see, we can't really get involved in a very interesting debate if all 4 of us or 5 of us, let me count here, all 5 of us just sit here and not have something to talk about. It's very important that we come and ask you particular questions. Agreed? It's very difficult for me to go into the director of television and have a meaningful discussion unless he shares some information. What about if? What about if? What about if? What do you think? If he says, I can't tell you anything because I'm sworn to secrecy, that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
Well, obviously, in the case of consultations of that kind, there've got to be rules, and it's difficult in a discussion like this to determine what the rules should be. It's probably, as you say, a mixture of openness, and there are probably some information that is confidential, but I don't know exactly where the openness should stop and where the confidentiality should start. I mean, that is something that we ought to be able to work out.
Could I ask you a question about the recent past, Mr. Juneau, and the term redundancy, which is quite current in this downsizing operation that we're in? And I'd like to relate it to a specific case. There's a case of a producer, one of our members, who was producing a weekly program called This Week in Parliament, and he received a letter saying that his job was redundant. And he then later took a golden handshake. There was an accepted retirement, early retirement. But the result of the whole process was that he in fact left, and yet This Week in Parliament is still being produced. And I wonder in what sense you could tell me his job is redundant. There's still a producer in there.
I don't know, obviously. I don't know that case. There are a large number of producers, and I'm not familiar with all the cases of all the producers. I don't make those decisions personally.
It's not just an isolated case. It's a case of, how do you define redundancy?
Well, I suppose if the same number of programs can be done by a smaller number of people, then at some point you may consider that some people are redundant in that sense. But I don't know that particular case.
Isn't it a problem that we seem to be mixing up firing people and people who jobs that are redundant? Isn't there a tendency when you're downsizing to say, okay, let's get rid of some people, rather than doing it in other ways? I don't think that the case that I cited was a case of wanting to get rid of somebody who wasn't wanted in the corporation. He was a valued employee and had done a good job and had been commended throughout the years for his work. But there does seem to be some mix-up in management's mind about how you deal with downsizing if it in fact has to be done. And redundancy gets mixed up with firing.
Well, I would hope, and I haven't received myself complaints about people who would have been gotten rid of under the guise of staff reductions for subjective reasons, for some reasons of enmity between people. I haven't heard of cases of that kind. I don't know what you mean by firing people.
I think you raised earlier, and I will use your own analogy, in the good days, the CBC, as you pointed out earlier, people, there seemed to be a more harmonious feeling about folks, and then when cutbacks come, as you pointed out earlier, people tend to try to are a little more protectionist. I would suggest that in the good old days in the CBC, and you know bureaucracies better than I, we probably weren't as diligent as we should have been in terms of human management, because we had all sorts of places to put folks. And I think what's catching up with us is that kind of, I would suggest, laissez-faire management style in times of restraint, create the situation that Ken talks about. Those folks don't quite work into the more slim and trim and mean organization. Maybe they don't fit. The problem with that is it might make some sense on a scheme somewhere. In our point of view, it's morally not correct.
Well, I don't know what you refer to when you say it's morally not correct. Where I think I would agree with you is that, and maybe that's what you mean by morally not correct, when you go through exercises like the one we went through in the fall of 1984 and the one we're going through now in the last few months, in a big organization like the CBC, and where the job elimination runs in the hundreds. The first time in the fall of '84 it was 1,150 jobs and 350 layoffs. This time is about 350 jobs and 125 layoffs. Those are large numbers of people. I calculated, by the way, that if the government as a whole had laid off as many people as we have, they would have laid off 10,000. And I haven't seen that in the government. So I think that it's very tough what is happening to the CBC.
What's your own assessment of your job? Have you been fighting hard enough to...
Let's get back to that, but I want to finish on that question. So when in such big operations involving numbers like the ones I've mentioned, it's inevitable that in some cases there's some pretty rough things happen. It cannot all be smooth. It's usually done over a short period, and it cannot all be smooth. Some of it, I suspect, can be pretty rough.
Yeah, I guess it leads me to my other question, and that's about the CBC's industrial strategy. And I will speak generally that it seems to me, and I think you've seen this yourself, we are in the midst of some very serious negotiations with our labor unions. They don't seem to be going well from what we read on the walls at the CBC in Winnipeg. And we've seen in our own association recently with our own layoffs and then our arbitrations to fight those layoffs, a kind of attitude which says, look, we had a lot of staff people here for a long time, and that's not the way we're going to do business. We are going to go on the street, we're going to have more contract workers, we are going to become, we are going to go out and buy more of that product, even that the human labor. I wonder, quite straightforwardly, is that the direction this organization is going?
No. I've spoken a number of times on this, and I've argued this with Kaplan Sauvageau. Well, nobody is, you were just going to ask before we got into that whether I've made enough of an effort to represent the position of the CBC. Well, let me remind you that nobody fought harder than I did, not even your union. If I may be unfair because I don't remember exactly what you did, but I don't remember many people fighting harder than I did on the suggestion of the Applebaum et Bear committee that the CBC should farm out all the work outside except news and public affairs, except news, I think they said. So no, I don't believe that. I have put my position quite clearly. I've fought the people who think that the CBC should contract all the work outside. I've said over and over again, I made a speech at Ryerson about it, saying that the CBC must remain a creative organization. And that I've said, however, that it would be bad strategy on our part, and it would be bad strategy on the part of our people and their unions to resist the idea that the CBC's got to work to some extent with the private producers and with the community outside. It is a reality not only in this country but in all countries now. And the idea that corporations like the CBC, whether it's the BBC or the French television networks, can keep all the work to themselves for the programs that go on the air, and that they don't work, I think is a suicidal idea, because there is a creative community out there now, and if you don't cooperate with them, they're going to fight you.
Do you believe in a stable of in-house producers?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I've said that. I mean, it's all written down. We've said it to Kaplan Sojo. It's written down. I made a speech only on that at Ryerson about 4 months ago. I spoke at the meeting of the CFTA 2 years ago, I think now, where I said, we will work with you, but if you start a fight to get everything that is going on in CBC, a la Applebaum-Hivert, you'll find me, you know, on your way. I will resist that. I don't agree with it.
In all due respect, sir, if you look at our association, it is, and I'll be correct by my colleagues on the statistics, we are now 60-65% contract workers.
Oh, we're talking of something else now.
Well,
we were talking of farming out work.
Well, I talk about that. I also talk about the fact that a lot of the labor unions in this country fear that a lot of their work will become contract as well. I don't put this question to you to say it's right or wrong. I guess what we'd like to know is what direction are we going?
Well, let's distinguish between the two questions. We were first talking, at least that's what I thought you were talking about, of productions being farmed out to private producers with their own producers, their own technicians, their own managers, et cetera, et cetera. And I explained my position on that, and it's very firm, and I've explained it to the minister. My impression is that he agrees with that position, and I think at this stage where the policy of the CBC is being reviewed by the government, and presumably there may even be legislation, it's important that, you know, the minister understand our position. Now, you're talking about the people, you then say, what about the people who work inside the CBC? Is the policy of the corporation that they should all be contract people? No. I don't really know what the balance should be between staff people and contract people. I really don't know, but I don't believe that it would be a good policy to drive towards a position where everybody would be contract people. I've discussed that with the leaders of the radio producers along the same lines, and one of them pointed out to me that the identification of staff people with the corporation is very important to go back
loyalty.
to
For loyalty.
For loyalty, to go back to the analogy of the body, to the soul of the corporation. It's very important. Not that the contract people are not loyal, but it's important to have a body of people who feel they belong to the corporation. I feel very strongly about that.
Shorter term. There's a tendency toward more shorter term
Well,
contracts.
I would hope that we would strike a balance. And to be very candid with you, I don't know what that balance should be, but I think that there's a delicate, there's a need for a clarification of what that balance should be.
But you're probably aware that a lot of senior producers, by senior, I mean older than 50, but a lot less than 60, who seem to be the candidates who are being approached and being encouraged to take early retirement and that sort of thing. And speaking about excellence and speaking about striving to all kinds of objectives, this is certainly a concern of this organization, that we find ourselves with some of our senior people being challenged in terms of making a career with the corporation after they have earned their spurs at the expense of the corporation and are now ready to perhaps give us the type of programming we all dream of. This is the type of thing that is happening in very many regional
Well, you
stations.
know, don't get me into too specific cases. I'm telling you as forcefully as I can that I don't believe myself that it would be a good policy for the corporation not to have people who belong to the corporation, who are members of the staff. I don't believe it'd be a good policy, and frankly, I don't hear proposals from the people around me that we should go in that direction.
Sorry, Randy,
But having said that, I will grant you that it requires more precision than what I'm able to tell you now in a discussion of this kind. But on the level of principles, I wouldn't agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose we're trying to fall in somewhere between the lifetime tenure at CBC that had become a joke on the streets, the notion of the complete civil servant.
Yes, yes.
And we're trying to, I suppose, place that against this notion. I believe our membership, CTPDA membership, is largely contract, majority on contract. And I believe that the notion of some corporate loyalty is there. In spite of your discussion of our opening remarks, I think you have a very loyal group of people in our membership to the CBC and the aims and purposes of the CBC. And we seem to be spreading a message across the country, not by the terms of employment as much as by the danger of employment, that a full-time relationship with the CBC is not something to be looked at too favorably, that to work on a short-term contract. First of all, my understanding, in the West at least, is about the only way one would get a job in TV production would be to go on contract. There was a feeling years ago that we were all family anyway. It was simply what we called each other. I wonder if we're starting to come into the notion of the disposable producer, that we can just bring people in with almost no commitment to them and use them as well as we can for 10 or 12 or 14 years. And then save all the problems here of arbitration, of warning, of layoff, of golden handshakes by simply just letting them go.
Yeah. Well, instinctively, I would not go in that direction. It may be that, and that is an area for consultation, I would think, it may be that we need to do more thinking. You yourself referred to the fact that the CBC over the years has created an image for itself of, you know, that it was a family, and like in a family you had total security, whatever you did or wherever you did, whatever you did not.
That's appropriate, by the way, you understand.
No, or whatever you did not do, and so on. So there is that problem that we have to deal with. On the other hand, there is all the you know, the advantages of people belonging to the organization. But it is complex, you know, because you yourself were saying that the people on contract, and most of your members, you say, are on contract, also are loyal to the CBC. Mm-hmm. So it's a complex question. By the way, I would like to use say something that you reminded me by some of your remarks. In relation to what I said at the beginning in commenting on Leo's introductory remarks, I would like to say here what I've said a number of times, and I say constantly these days outside the CBC, I also say it inside, that I think the loyalty of the CBC people is just remarkable. It seems a contradiction with what I said before, and I'll deal with that apparent contradiction, but I think it's absolutely remarkable. I think the discipline also of the people of the CBC is absolutely remarkable. I say that to politicians. I've said it to the parliamentary committee. The contradiction is that there is these family quarrels, I think, that are hurting us. But I must add right away, as I've just did, that the programs are on the air in radio and in television. They're good. We've had a very good year. So I think it's really remarkable how in these periods, this period of difficulty, how people, whether they're staff or contract, have maintain an extremely high level of discipline and loyalty and competence in the programs that are being made.